Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs.
Hi, I'm Sean Reeves with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999. I'm an associate certified entomologist, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990.
Mosquito characteristics and biology.
There are some behavioral characteristics that are common to most mosquito species, but by and large there are a few generalizations that can be made. The male-female ratio in adult mosquitoes is normally about 1 to 1. Males emerge from the pupal stage about 24 hours before the females and stay in the immediate vicinity until female emergence, so the majority of females in any population is fertile. Both females and males drink nectar and other plant juices as energy sources, but only females take a blood meal, utilizing the protein from blood to produce eggs. In a few species, females acquire enough protein during the larval stage to produce eggs when they become adults, and so do not require a blood meal to reproduce. The mosquito lifespan is highly variable and dependent upon a number of environmental conditions. In general, males are much shorter lived than females, surviving for a few days to a week, while females may live for several weeks to months depending upon the species and local conditions. Generally, mosquitoes remain inactive during the day, resting in cool, humid locations to minimize moisture loss. Feeding and mating activity occurs from dusk through the night until just after dawn. Knowing specific behavior of individual species is very important for controlling or preventing both mosquito-borne diseases and pest mosquito problems. To understand the dynamics of mosquito-borne disease transmission and plan effective control measures for either disease or pest problems, you need to know an impressive number of facts about the mosquito species in the area of concern. This information includes the types of larval breeding sites used, biting preference of females, birds, mammals, reptiles, or combinations, seasonal population levels, how far mosquitoes fly from their sites of origin, whether or not a given species can become infected with and later transmit the pathogen involved, whether a given species in the area is actually infected with pathogen at the time the disease is present in vertebrate host, many other related specific items of information. These types of specifics usually are unique for a given area, so the information that may have been assembled at other times and places may not be accurate for your area. Basic insect biology. Mosquitoes belong to the order Diptera, true flies, and the family Calicidae. They are related to other dipterans including blowflies, gnats, houseflies, and midges. Like all adult insects, mosquitoes have three main body parts: the head, thorax, and abdomen. There are 4 distinct stages in its life cycle: the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. While the adult is an active flying insect, the larval and pupal stages are aquatic. Let's take a look at the mosquito life cycle. First, we have an adult female mosquito that lay eggs in containers that hold water. Secondly, we have the eggs. Eggs hatch within a few days to months when covered with water. Next, we have the larvae. Larvae live in water. They develop into pupa in as few as 5 days. Our next stage, the pupa, live in water. They developed into adult flying mosquitoes in 2 to 3 days. We've then completed the mosquito life cycle. Taking a look at the anatomy of mosquitoes. Because mosquitoes are insects, the best place to start is by learning about what makes something an insect. All insects have the same 3 things in common. 1, 3 body regions, 2, 6 legs, and 3, a hard exoskeleton. The three body regions of insects consist of the head, thorax, and abdomen. The head consists of all the sensory and feeding structures. This includes the antenna and eyes for smelling, hearing, and seeing, the palps for smelling and tasting, and the mouth parts for feeding. In mosquitoes, the mouth parts consist of a long, straw-like structure called the proboscis. The proboscis is actually made up of several needle-like stylets that pierce into the skin to obtain blood. The thorax of an insect is what contains the wings, legs, and most of the muscles involved in locomotion. As mentioned earlier, all insects have 6 legs. When present, most insects have 2 pairs of wings. However, mosquitoes belong to the group of insects called flies and only have 1 pair of wings. Rather than having a second pair of wings, they have balancing organs called halteres. The abdomen in insects is what houses most of the organs for digestion, reproduction, and excretion. Unlike humans and mammals, insects do not have bones. Rather, their skeletons, called exoskeletons, are on the outside of their bodies. The exoskeleton helps protect the insect.
Take a few moments to review this diagram of a mosquito's body.
Metamorphosis. All insects undergo metamorphosis, a change from one form to another. Easy ways to think about this are caterpillars morphing into butterflies or maggots morphing into houseflies. While this is an oversimplification, it demonstrates that all insects change over time. There are actually 2 ways in which insects change or metamorphosize. In incomplete or gradual metamorphosis, the insect gradually gets bigger and bigger over time until it eventually becomes a mature insect. In this type of metamorphosis, only the adult form will have fully functioning wings. Examples include various types of cockroaches, grasshoppers, and bedbugs. Complete versus incomplete metamorphosis. The other type of metamorphosis is called complete metamorphosis. In this type, insects will change completely from one form to another with a transitionary stage in the middle. This transitionary stage is called a pupa or a cocoon. A pupa is a non-feeding stage.
Examples of insects with complete metamorphosis include beetles, butterflies, flies, moths, and bees.
Habitats. Insects exist in almost all parts of the world. They can be found in temperate, tropical, Arctic, and even desert habitats. Typically, insects will have certain adaptations that allow them to live in these habitats. For example, insects that live in the Arctic often have the ability to withstand freezing temperatures. Mosquitoes live in water as immatures. Because they do not have gills, they need special structures that allow them to breathe air at the surface. Mosquito larvae have a siphon, which functions a lot like a snorkel. They use the siphon to breathe air, even though they live in water. Nutrition. Some insects, like beetles, have chewing mouthparts and will choose foods that require chewing. Other insects, such as butterflies, have siphons as mouthparts, which requires them to feed on liquids. As immatures, mosquitoes are filter feeders, chewing on small particles and organisms in the water. As adults, both male and female mosquitoes will feed on plant nectars. Females will also take a blood meal, in which she uses the protein for egg production. On the current image, we're showing the head of an Anopheles male mosquito and a Culex male mosquito.
Notice the palpus and proboscis differences. The Anopheles proboscis is longer and the palpus is wider than the culex. Eggs. Mosquito eggs are white when first deposited, darkening within 12 to 24 hours. Single eggs are about 1/50th of an inch, 0.5 millimeters long, and have a shape similar to a grain of rice when viewed with the naked eye. However, under magnification, eggs of different species vary in appearance. Some examples which include canoe-shaped, elongated, or elongated oval. Other notable examples include Anopheles eggs, which have lateral floats, entrapped air compartments attached to each side, or toxornchite eggs, which look similar in shape to ping pong balls. Some species lay eggs singly, while others are laid together to form rafts. The incubation period, elapsed time between oviposition and egg hatch, may vary considerably among different species. Desiccation-resistant eggs. Some mosquito eggs can withstand drying for long periods up to multiple years in some species. They are referred to as desiccation-resistant because their hardened shell helps prevent the egg from drying out. Species that utilize this strategy, primarily Aedes and Saurophora, deposit their eggs on moist soil or another wet substrate that will eventually become flooded. This includes both habitats that receive frequent flooding or those that only flood once a year. Because these eggs can survive long periods prior to hatching, species using this strategy generally overwinter as eggs. Non-desiccation resistant eggs. Other species lay eggs that must remain moist before hatching within a few days. As a result, species using this strategy, such as Culex, Anopheles, and Culecida, generally lay their eggs directly on the water surface. Eggs that are deposited directly on the water surface, permanent water breeders, may hatch in 1 to 3 days depending on the temperature. Eggs of those species that are laid directly on the water surface have no means of preventing hatching. Therefore, these species survive adverse periods over winter in the adult stage. Larvae. The larvae, wigglers or wrigglers, of all mosquitoes live in water and have 4 developmental periods or instars. Undergoing these changes can take 4 to 14 days, depending on the water temperature. Warmer water typically expedites development, and food. At the end of each instar, the larva sheds its skin by a process called molting. Mosquito larvae have 3 body regions: the head, thorax, and abdomen. Head. The head bears the antenna, eyes, mouth parts, and hairs of varied sizes. Behind the antenna are the eyes, located near the hind margin of the head. The mouth parts are on the underside of the head near the front and include a series of brushes that vibrate rapidly, creating an eddy-like current that sweeps small organisms into the mouth upon which the larva feeds. Thorax. The thorax is broader than the head or abdomen and somewhat flattened from top to bottom. It has several groups of hairs which are useful in identification of species. Neither wings nor legs are present in the larval stage. Abdomen. The abdomen is long and generally cylindrical, consisting of 9 distinct segments. The first 7 segments are similar, but the 8th and 9th are considerably modified. The 8th segment bears a respiratory apparatus. This apparatus may vary in shape, but larvae of most species possess an elongate siphon or air tube. There are other mosquito larvae that have no air tube. The genus Anopheles has a cluster of small plates that serves the same purpose. The Anopheles larva also has several pairs of unique palmate hairs along its upper abdomen. These hairs assist the larva in maintaining its parallel position with the water surface while feeding. The ninth segment is commonly known as the anal segment and is modified for excretion of body waste and regulation of body fluids and salt. Larvae belonging to the genus Coquilitidia and Mansonia remain underwater during their developmental stages and fasten themselves to the roots of water plants by means of an armed or toothed siphon tube. Pupa. Unlike most insects, the mosquito pupa, tumbler, is very active and, like the larva, lives in water. It differs greatly from larva in shape and appearance. The pupa has a comma-shaped body, divisible in two distinct regions. The front region consists of the head and thorax, cephalothorax, and is greatly enlarged. It bears a pair of respiratory trumpets on the upper surface. The second region is the abdomen, which has freely movable segments with a pair of paddle-like appendages at the tip. The pupal stage lasts only for a few days, during which feeding does not take place. Adults. The adult mosquito is an entirely airborne terrestrial stage. However, the transition from the pupal stage to the adult is the most vulnerable portion of the mosquito life cycle. The adult must slowly work its way out of the pupal casing, using it as a float. Then the mosquito must stand on the water surface for several minutes until its wings dry before it can become airborne. During this time, any kind of wave action could tip over the adult and cause it to drown. For this reason, mosquitoes breed in quiescent, aquatic habitats and not in large bodies of water subject to waves. Head. The head of the mosquito is almost spherical and bears a pair of large compound eyes, a pair of antennae, a pair of palpi, and a large proboscis. The proboscis projects forward and slightly downward from the lower front margin of the head. Although it appears to be a single structure, it is composed of 7 long, narrow mouth parts, 2 maxillae, 2 mandibles, a hypopharynx, a labrum, and a trough-like labium in which all the other mouth parts lie when not involved in the feeding process. Apart from the labium, the mouth parts collectively are called the fascicle, and this structure is inserted by the female mosquito into the host skin to obtain a blood meal. In males, the mouth parts are modified from those of the female and are used only to suck nectar and plant secretions where no piercing is required. Thorax. The middle section of the body is called the thorax and is composed of 3 segments. A pair of long, slender legs arise from the lower side of each of the segments. The first, thoracic segment, prothorax, and the third segment, metathorax, are smaller in size when compared to the second segment, mesothorax. A pair of transparent wings are attached to the mesothorax. Each wing contains a network of veins that strengthen the wing for flight. Attached to the veins are numerous flattened scales that may form various color patterns, useful in identification of mosquitoes. A pair of small knob structures, known as halteres, is found on the metathorax. These halteres vibrate rapidly when the mosquito is in flight, serving as organs for balance. Let's look at the abdomen. The abdomen is an elongate, cylindrical structure composed of 10 segments. The 9th and 10th segments are greatly modified for reproduction in both sexes. The modified terminal segments of the males are extremely useful in taxonomic work, but they are too complicated to be considered in this manual. The tip of the abdomen in females is either tapered or blunt and aids in the identification of different genera of mosquitoes. The color pattern of the abdomen may vary from one species to another, depending on the color and arrangement of scales and hairs, as well as the color of the underlying integument. Males and females. Understanding the difference between male and female mosquitoes is a crucial component of arboviral testing. Only females require a blood meal because they utilize the proteins in blood for egg development. As a result, males are not involved in disease transmission. Both males and females utilize sugars from plant nectars as a source of energy for flight. Adult females live longer than males, though males generally emerge first. Protandry. Depending on species and conditions, females can live from a few weeks to months, with males typically living for about 10 days. Males have bushy antennae and long palps, as you see on the left. On the right, females generally have short palps and lightly feathered antennae. Visually, the males and females can be easily distinguished from one another. The main technique to determine a male from a female is to observe the antenna. Males have plum rose, feathery antennae, whereas females have only sporadic hairs. Males also have modified mouthparts, having longer maxillary palps than the proboscis. Females, except the Anopheles genus, have shorter maxillary palps. Mosquitoes, vector of diseases. Mosquitoes can transmit or vector several important disease-causing pathogens that we will learn about in this course. In some diseases, mosquitoes serve as amplification vectors in which they are involved in amplifying or increasing the virus and its natural host. They can also function as bridge vectors, in which they transfer the pathogen from one type of host, such as an animal, to another, such as a human. Mosquito-borne encephalitis. Encephalitis is a disease affecting the central nervous system. There are 6 major types of mosquito-borne encephalitic virus known to occur in the United States: California encephalitis, CE, Eastern equine encephalitis, EEE, St. Louis encephalitis, SLE, Western equine encephalitis, WEE, West Nile virus, WNV, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis, VEE. The viruses that cause Eastern equine, St. Louis, and West Nile encephalitis are normally transmitted from bird to mosquito to bird, and less commonly from bird to mosquito to human. The bird-mosquito-bird transmission is known as the endemic cycle and is the way viruses are perpetuated in the environment. The transmission of the virus to the person by the bite of an infective mosquito is known as the epidemic cycle. The virus group that causes California encephalitis is normally transmitted by mosquitoes among small animals, chipmunks, squirrels, and rabbits, and occasionally transmitted to people. Human cases of mosquito-borne viral infections range from inapparent or mild to very severe illness, which may permanently damage the central nervous system or cause death. Malaria, dengue, and yellow fever were historically very important. Prior to organized mosquito control, hundreds of thousands of individuals lost their lives due to these diseases in the southern United States. While these diseases are rarely a concern in present times, the risk of arthropod-borne viruses, arboviruses, have become increasingly important. Mosquitoes serve as vectors of many arboviruses, including West Nile virus, Eastern equine encephalitis virus, and St. Louis encephalitis virus. In addition to viruses, mosquitoes also serve as important vectors of other parasites and pathogens, such as those that cause malaria and canine heartworm. The word encephalitis means an inflammation of the brain and possibly the spinal cord, encephalomyelitis. While there are several causes for encephalitis, pathogens, such as West Nile virus, can be one potential cause. Fortunately, not all individuals infected with arboviruses will exhibit neurological symptoms. Many are either asymptomatic or have flu-like symptoms. Some arboviruses, such as dengue, Zika virus, and chikungunya, can all easily cycle between humans and competent mosquitoes. However, many of the significant arboviruses have an animal host that serves as a reservoir for the virus. Reservoirs are animals in which viruses replicate to high enough levels that mosquitoes can pick it up in nature. Arbovirus transmission cycles that have animal reservoirs are called zoonoses, meaning they occur naturally in cycles between mosquitoes and non-human vertebrates. While humans can get sick from West Nile virus, the levels are not high enough in our blood to infect another mosquito. Humans and animals that do not develop enough viral loads for transmission are termed dead-end hosts. West Nile virus. West Nile virus was introduced into the United States in the New York area in 1999. Although originally misdiagnosed as St. Louis encephalitis, SLE, it was quickly recognized as responsible not only for human disease and several deaths, but also involved in heavy avian mortality, especially in the passerine family, Corvidae, crows, jays, owls, and hawks. Like SLE, WNV is transmitted naturally between birds by certain species of mosquitoes. Humans, horses, dogs, cats, and most other vertebrates are likely accidental or dead-end hosts, meaning they are not capable of passing the virus on to uninfected mosquitoes. For every 100 infected persons, only 20 will develop symptoms of fever or more severe disease, with most showing symptoms associated with a cold, headache, fever, fatigue, and occasionally rash, swollen lymph glands, or eye pain. Only a few individuals, less than 1%, develop severe disease, including high fever, headache, neck stiffness, stupor, disorientation, coma, tremors, convulsions, muscle weakness, vision loss, numbness, and paralysis. These symptoms may last several weeks, and neurological effects may be permanent. About 10% of severe cases are fatal. Following its initial introduction, WMV spread south and then west in the United States, probably transported during local and migratory movement of birds. WNV is known to kill more than 300 species of birds, and 60 mosquito species have been found infected, with many identified as potential vectors. Because of high viremia and resulting in severe pathology in some birds infected with the virus, dead birds were once useful as an early indicator of WNV activity in a new area. Likewise, mosquito infections have tended to be a useful predictor of WMV activity. Sentinel chickens, while historically useful as indicators of SLE and eastern equine encephalitis (EEE) circulation in the eastern U.S., they have not been particularly useful in providing an adequate advance warning of WNV activity. St. Louis encephalitis. St. Louis encephalitis, SLE, is another arboviral disease similar to WNV. It cycles between birds and primarily Culex mosquitoes. Infected humans may experience abrupt onset of fever, nausea, and vomiting with severe headaches. These symptoms develop within 5 to 15 days after a person is bitten by an infected mosquito. A person of any age may contract the disease, however the symptoms are more severe in people 60 years of age or older. Case fatality rates may range from 3 to 30%, with most occurring in the elderly. Humans become infected with SLE only as a result of being bitten by an infected mosquito. There is no person-to-person transmission. The chances of contracting the disease are in direct proportion to the number of infected birds and the abundance of Culex mosquitoes in the vicinity. SLE outbreaks are most likely to occur from midsummer to early fall and are often associated with extended drought earlier in the year. Drought conditions shrink the mosquito breeding habits, reducing the available water for birds and increasing the likelihood of meeting one another. Culex quinquefasciatus, a foul water breeder, is the primary vector of SLE, and its numbers may increase in drought conditions. Although superficially like WNV in transmission cycle, and a member of the same virus family, SLE in human cases tend to occur in urban areas where house sparrows, the primary vertebrate reservoir host, and Culex quinquefasciatus coincide. This may be due to a narrower mosquito host range for the SLE virus as compared to WNV. SLE was first recognized as a disease in the early 1930s during outbreaks in St. Louis, Missouri, and Paris, Illinois. The most severe epidemic of SLE in recent decades swept through the Mississippi River Valley in 1975. In its path, a total of 1,941 confirmed and presumptive cases were recorded over 28 states and the District of Columbia, including 95 confirmed deaths. The states of Mississippi, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio reported the most cases. There are approximately 128 human cases recorded annually in the U.S., but typically much smaller outbreaks occur. Eastern equine encephalitis virus transmission. Eastern equine encephalitis virus, EEEV, is spread through the bite of a mosquito on an infected bird, and it transmits the illness to horses and humans through an additional bite. EEEV does not spread from direct contact between infected horses to humans and vice versa. Eastern equine encephalitis, EEE, is a viral infection maintained in nature by a bird mosquito-bird cycle like SLE. It is distributed along the coastal states of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. In the U.S., there are approximately 5 human cases annually, with 220 human cases since 1964. EEE is the deadliest mosquito-borne virus to occur in the U.S., with a 30% fatality rate. Equines are involved as dead-end hosts in the cycle, along with man. EEE can infect persons of any age, but those younger than 15 and older than 50 are particularly vulnerable to severe disease. Onset of symptoms typically occurs 3 to 10 days after an infected mosquito bite. Half of those who survive are inflicted with varying degrees of mental disability and paralysis. There are several mosquitoes, especially Culicida melanura, that can maintain and transmit EEE in nature. Since CS melanura is uncommon and seldom bites man, other mosquitoes such as CS internata, CX quinque fasciatus, southern house mosquito, Aedes albopictus, Asian tiger mosquito, AE solicitans, tan salt marsh mosquito, AE vexans, AE infirmitus, AE atlanticus, and Coquilitidia perturbans are important in transmission from birds to man and or equines. Factors favoring infection in man are the buildup of virus in wild bird populations and a high density of adult mosquito vectors. Human risk is highest in rural areas near bodies of water, supporting development of competent mosquito vectors. Western equine encephalitis. Western equine encephalitis, WEE, is another arboviral disease in the United States and is found mainly in the states west of the Mississippi River. Culex tarsalis is the most important vector throughout the western United States, and, as with EEE, birds are the major host. East of the Mississippi River, CX quinque fasciatus is the suspected vector. Both man and equines are accidental or dead-end host. As with EEE, a vaccine for horses is available, but no vaccine is available for humans. Transmission is the most frequent when mosquitoes feed between dawn and dusk, so outdoor activities during this period should be avoided. La Crosse, California group, encephalitis. La Crosse encephalitis virus, LAC, is a member of the California group of encephalitis viruses, family Bunyaviridae. Most cases of LAC have been reported from the states of Ohio, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and Minnesota. Advanced surveillance and detection of human disease from LAC in recent years identified large foci in mid-Atlantic states such as West Virginia and in western North Carolina. There's an average of 70 cases per year, with most severe disease occurring in children younger than 16 years of age and resulting in less than a 1% fatality rate. Zika virus. Zika virus was first discovered in Africa, Uganda, in 1947. In May of 2015, it was detected in the Americas for the first time. While at this time, little was known about the virus, we have now begun to understand a great deal about negative impacts of the virus. Most individuals, about 80%, that become infected will not show symptoms. Of those that do, symptoms are generally mild and includes fever, joint pain, conjunctivitis, and rash. Neurological complications or death are extremely rare. There is no specific treatment for Zika. The current concern regarding Zika virus is the link between infection during pregnancy and having a child born with microcephaly, reduced brain size. The virus has also been linked to Guillain-Barré syndrome, a condition in which the immune system attacks the peripheral nerves. Container mosquitoes, such as Aedes albopictus, Asian tiger mosquito, and Aedes aegypti, yellow fever mosquito, are the two most important vectors of Zika virus that occur in our area. These mosquitoes lay eggs in backyard containers, buckets, trash cans, tires, bottles, etc. Chikungunya virus. Chikungunya, CHK, gets its name from the Kamako language, that which bends up, referring to the arthritic pain caused by the illness. Chikungunya virus is an emergent arbovirus that has not yet been detected in the United States. Recent outbreaks of the disease have recently occurred in Europe and Asia and the Caribbean. Illnesses are often mild and may go unnoticed. Serious illness or death rarely occurs. However, most cases deal with long-term health issues, such as severe joint pain. The virus is transmitted between humans and human-biting mosquitoes. Two important species, yellow fever mosquito and Asian tiger mosquitoes, which are potential vectors of this virus. These species are found in urban and suburban habitats where they lay eggs in man-made containers. Dengue is a viral disease transmitted from person to person by mosquitoes. Dengue is also called break-bone fever because it can cause severe joint and muscle pain. Dengue is worldwide in its distribution, primarily in the tropics and subtropics, and infects 50 to 100 million people annually, with 200,000 severe disease cases. It is often characterized by severe headache, pain behind the eyes, high fever, backache, pain in the joints, and a rash, and may require several weeks to fully recover. These symptoms generally occur 5 to 6 days after an infected mosquito has bitten a susceptible person. In uncomplicated cases, death rarely occurs. There are 4 strains of dengue, and in some areas of the world, infection from several strains of dengue virus may result in more severe and often fatal forms of dengue, known as dengue, hemorrhagic fever, DHF, and dengue shock syndrome. Dengue is transmitted by the container breeders, A.E. aegypti and A.E. albopictus, in mosquito-man-mosquito cycle. After biting an infected person, the female mosquito requires 8 to 10 days for viral development before she is capable of virus transmission to man. Once infected, the mosquito remains ineffective for the remainder of her life. Although A.E. aegypti is the primary vector on a worldwide basis, A.E. albopictus is quite capable of serving as a vector, as evidenced in the 2015 to 2016 Hawaii outbreak. Presently, there is no commercially available vaccine. Treatment for uncomplicated cases of dengue consists of providing the victim with as much relief from the disease symptoms as possible. The severe forms are normally treated with intravenous fluids or transfusions and other therapies. Yellow fever. Yellow fever is caused by a virus closely related to the dengue virus. In fact, yellow fever infections produce dengue-like symptoms in humans. However, the effects of yellow fever are normally much more severe. The fatality rate may reach 50% or more in epidemics. The virus is presently found in Africa, Central America, and South America. It is absent from the continental U.S. at present. The last epidemic of yellow fever in the continental U.S. occurred in New Orleans in 1905. It's also important to note that more than 41,000 people died from the scourge of yellow fever in New Orleans between the years of 1817, which was the first year that reliable statistics are available, and 1905, when we had the big epidemic. You also may want to know that one of the reasons why New Orleans had such an epidemic problem with this is because of their wet environment. And this is why we always talk about mosquito breeding grounds. When you live in an area like New Orleans that has water all around it, you're obviously going to have more trouble with mosquito issues, so you have to handle them on a much larger basis than if you live in Kansas somewhere in the middle of a field where there's really no standing water. As with dengue, the yellow fever virus is transmitted in urban areas by A.E. aegypti and A.E. albopictus. Unlike dengue, however, the probability of the virus reaching the U.S. is low. This may be due, in part, to the fact that yellow fever, along with cholera, smallpox, and plague, are quarantinable diseases. I would say this is a great time to note the fact that regulatory pest control operations and quarantines are very important. Many of you work on the residential side or even commercial buildings, but when you understand you have outbreaks like this, that regulatory pest control, the states, the counties, the cities, parishes like you have in Louisiana, can be a really big deal. So we have to keep in mind once again that we're handling things on a small scale, most of us, but some of these things do need to be handled on a bigger scale. This means that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, are continually monitoring outbreaks of yellow fever in the Western Hemisphere. There's an extremely effective yellow fever vaccine called 17D. All persons who pass through yellow fever endemic areas must show evidence of proper vaccination prior to re-entry into this country. All arriving planes and ships are required to undergo insecticidal fumigation treatment to kill any mosquitoes that might otherwise be potential vectors. And I can confirm this firsthand as I have friends that work at the different ports and they do these insecticidal fumigations to kill these mosquitoes because they understand once they get loose in the country, we can start having issues with different diseases that we normally don't. So I live in Florida, so we've got ports all across the state, and it's very interesting to me that some people have whole careers doing these fumigations at the ports. We're not going to talk a lot about that now, but you can completely understand that without these insecticidal fumigations, these mosquitoes carrying these diseases get loose, we could have outbreaks in the U.S. We just currently have a good system in place that helps to prevent that in most cases. As you can imagine, you can't have a course that talks about mosquito diseases without talking about malaria. On a worldwide basis, malaria remains the most important human disease transmitted by mosquitoes. According to CDC information in 2018, there were 228 million human cases of malaria and 405,000 deaths. In the same year, the U.S. had 2,000 cases related to travel from countries where malaria is transmitted. Most of the deaths, 75%, are children under 10 years of age and pregnant women. In Africa, 1 in every 20 children dies from malaria. It is believed that malaria was introduced into the North American continent during colonization. Tens of thousands of cases occurred in the U.S. before the 1930s, but there are no reliable statistics available for the period. However, in the 1930s, approximately 100,000 cases were reported annually. In the early 1940s, the number of cases was reduced dramatically due to the work of public health agencies using DDT during and after World War II and the Tennessee Valley Authority TVA Source Reduction Program. I think many of you will understand the benefits of programs like the TVA started back in the fall of 1934. One of their goals was to improve the economy in the Tennessee Valley, but one of the other big things was establishing dams and reservoirs to generate power, but also to reduce the breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So when you have something like a dam to control water, you can keep it flowing. Whereas before, when it would flood and when it would rain, these rivers would just get out of their banks, they would go off into fields and areas like that, and mosquito breeding would go wild. So believe it or not, the TVA plan was one of the biggest things for mosquito control in the whole Southeast. And you've also seen in other parts of the country, they've duplicated what the TVA was doing, and it's been a really big help on mosquito control nationwide. Since the late 1950s, a few hundred to a few thousand new cases have been recorded annually, almost entirely attributable to military returnees from endemic regions. These cases were contracted outside the U.S., but symptoms appeared following re-entry into the country. Until recently, rarely has there been secondary infection contracted in the U.S., but since 41% of the world's population lives in malarious areas, the risk for importation is constant. Between 1957 and 2003, there have been 63 outbreaks of locally transmitted malaria in the U.S. In 2002 alone, there were 1,337 cases of malaria with 8 deaths. Human malaria is caused by any of 4 Plasmodium species of protozoa and is characterized by fever, chills, sweating, and headache. If not treated, it may cause shock, renal failure, acute encephalitis, coma, and death. The disease is transmitted by Anopheles mosquitoes. Canine heartworm. Canine heartworm, Dirofilaria immitis, a filaria worm, is a serious disease for all breeds of dogs in areas with subtropical or tropical climates. Humans can also become infected, but the worms are unable to develop or mature. The life cycle of canine heartworm involves 2 factors, mosquitoes and dogs. Mosquitoes ingest the immature worms or embryos called microfilariae that circulate in the blood of a dog while feeding. These immature worms migrate to the Malpighian tubules of the mosquito, where they undergo development through several larval stages in 9 to 14 days. The last stage, called the third or infective stage larva, then migrates to the mouthparts of the mosquito. When the female takes another blood meal, the larva falls out of the mouthparts and onto the skin of the dog. The dog becomes infected if the larva manages to find and enter the puncture wound. Most fail to make this transition. The larvae grow and migrate through subcutaneous tissues and large blood vessels and eventually enter the right ventricle of the dog's heart, thus the name. The larvae grow into adult worms measuring about 11 inches for the females and 6 inches for the male. The adult female worm lays no eggs, but instead extrudes the microfilariae, which circulate in the blood, thus completing the life cycle. Several genera of mosquitoes can transmit the parasite to dogs, e.g. Aedes, Anopheles, Culex, and Saurophora. And keep in mind, this is a disease that's very sensitive. People consider their pets like family, as most of you know. So just keep in mind, when you talk about something like this, you don't want to get too far in the weeds. It's good to have knowledge about it, but you don't want to get into in-depth conversations with your clients about this. Just let them know the best way to help keep them from getting the disease, or at least try to keep them from being exposed, is controlling the mosquitoes themselves, and then you don't have to worry as much about the disease. Thank you for choosing us. We would appreciate any comments you may have about the course. Please send us an email to pestceus@gmail.com. You are now ready to proceed to the exam. Once completed, you will receive your certificate.